Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a really fundamental question in science. How do we actually prove that one thing causes another? It's a huge question, and it's at the core of pretty much everything from medicine to education. You've probably heard this phrase a million times, right? And for good reason. It's a crucial reminder that just because two things happen together doesn't mean one made the other one happen. It could just be a coincidence, or maybe some other hidden factors pulling the strings on both. So, okay, if just observing a connection isn't enough, what do we do? How do we get past these things seem related to this thing definitively causes that thing? Well, to solve that puzzle, researchers have a very specific, very powerful tool in their toolkit. All right, let's get into it. We're talking about what's really considered the gold standard for figuring out cause and effect. It's called the experimental method, and this is where science really rolls up its sleeves and gets to work. The key word here, the one you really got to latch onto, is deliberately. See, in an experiment, the researcher isn't just a passive observer watching from the sidelines. Nope, they are an active participant. They intentionally go in and change something just to see what happens. So, to really get this, you have to understand the two main characters in the story. The independent variable is the one thing the researcher messes with. That's the potential cause. The dependent variable is what they measure to see if anything changed. That's the potential effect. Just think of it like this. If I do this, the independent variable, does it cause a change in that, the dependent variable? You know, an experiment isn't just messing around and seeing what sticks. It's a highly structured process, and that structure is there for a reason. It follows a very precise, very logical sequence to make sure the results are trustworthy. This whole process is basically a roadmap. You start with a question, you make an educated guess, your hypothesis, then you design the test, you run it, you analyze the numbers, and finally, you report what you found. To make this feel a bit more real, let's use an example from our source material, testing whether going to kindergarten actually improves how well kids do in first grade. And this right here, this is the absolute heart of the experiment. You've got your experimental group, they get the treatment, which in this case is kindergarten. Then you have your control group, they don't. And the really crucial part is that these two groups have to be as similar as possible in every other conceivable way. Age, socioeconomic background, you name it. That way, if you see a difference in their first grade achievement, you can be pretty darn sure it was the kindergarten that did it. Okay, so this method sounds pretty powerful, right? And it is, but it's not perfect. Like any tool, it has its strengths and its weaknesses, and knowing both is absolutely key. So let's talk about the good and the tricky parts. This really lays out the big trade-off, doesn't it? On one hand, you get this amazing, super precise control that lets you pinpoint a cause. But the flip side is that all that control can create a situation that's kind of artificial, one that doesn't look much like the messy real world. And, of course, humans are just complicated. Man, this quote just hits the nail on the head. It really gets to the biggest headache for anyone trying to do this kind of research. Unlike chemicals in a beaker, you can't just create two identical groups of people. We all have different life experiences, different personalities, different levels of motivation. The list goes on and on. I mean, just look at some of these. In our kindergarten study, could a kid's personal motivation affect their grades? Of course. What about their parents' education level? For sure. Researchers try their best to account for these things, but it's impossible to control for everything. We call these confounding variables, and they're what make experiments on people so challenging. So what's the big takeaway here? It's not that experiments are useless. No way. They are incredibly powerful. It just means we have to be smart about it. We have to look at the results with a critical eye and remember that the real world is a lot messier than a controlled lab setting. So understanding the methods is step one. But what happens after the experiment is over? Well, in our next explainer, we're going to put it all together and look at how a study like this gets written up and presented in its final formal report. And that really leaves us with a huge, fascinating question, doesn't it? If there's no such thing as a perfect experiment on people, how do we ever decide when the proof is good enough? When is the evidence strong enough to change a policy or introduce a new teaching method? That's the challenge that researchers and really all of us face every single day.